The last time you talked to him was when?
The last time I actually talked to him was Monday morning.
Okay, what do you guys talk about?
At 3:40 a.m., David Heisler made a fatal mistake. He opened the door. The woman standing there was the mother of his child, someone he once loved, someone he thought he knew. But she didn't come alone. And she didn't come to talk. Within minutes, David was bleeding on his kitchen floor, a pillowcase over his head, begging for his life. "I'm not going to kill you," the man whispered. "Just get in the car." That was the last lie David would ever hear. Because 82 minutes later, he was gone. His body wouldn't be found for 7 weeks. But the truth? The truth was already creeping out from the shadows, captured in text messages, caught on camera, and buried in a confession so horrifying it would haunt everyone who heard it. This is the night a custody battle became a death sentence. This is the story of David Heisler. And this is how they got away with it, until they didn't. Before we dive into this chilling case, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this case already has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe because we're about to uncover a truth darker than you can imagine. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we expose the next shocking true crime case. Now, let's begin. The call came in at 8:47 a.m. 911, what's your emergency? Ken Heisler's voice cracked through the line, trembling with a fear he'd never felt before. My son. I can't find my son. There's blood. Oh God, there's blood everywhere. June 27, 2016. Santa Clara, Utah. A town so quiet, so safe, that most people didn't bother locking their doors at night. But on this Monday morning, that sense of security shattered like glass across Ken Heisler's kitchen floor. Ken had just returned from his graveyard shift at work. Exhausted, he'd pushed open the front door expecting the familiar hum of his son's video games, maybe the smell of morning coffee. Instead, he was met with silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then he saw it. Blood. Not just a drop or a smear. A trail. Dark crimson streaks smeared across the kitchen tiles, leading toward the garage like breadcrumbs in a nightmare. Ken's heart hammered in his chest as he followed the path, his mind racing through every worst-case scenario. David, he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. David, where are you? Nothing. He stumbled toward his son's bedroom, hoping, praying, that David was asleep, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But when he reached the doorway, his blood ran cold. The room was untouched. The TV glowed with a paused video game. David's wallet sat on the dresser, cash still inside. His phone charger dangled from the wall socket, but the phone itself? Gone. And David's car, the gray Saturn that was always parked in the driveway? Also gone. But David never went anywhere without his wallet. Never. Ken's hand shook as he pulled out his phone and dialed his son's number. It rang once. Twice. Then straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. The phone was off. Or worse, destroyed. That's when Ken noticed something else. His wife's jewelry box, the one filled with sentimental rings and family heirlooms, was missing from their bedroom. And a single slipper lay abandoned in the hallway, its matching pair still tucked neatly beside David's bed. This wasn't a robbery. Robbers don't leave cash and wallets behind. This was something far more sinister. Ken dialed 911. Within minutes, patrol cars swarmed the Heisler home, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the quiet neighborhood. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering to each other, wondering what could possibly be happening in their peaceful little town. Detective Shaper was the first investigator on the scene. A seasoned cop with over 15 years on the force, he'd seen his share of missing persons cases. Most of them ended with a logical explanation, a night out that went too long, a miscommunication, a teenager running away. But the moment he stepped through the Heisler's front door, his instincts told him this was different. "Show me where you found the blood," Shaper said, his voice calm but commanding. Ken led him to the kitchen, pointing with a trembling finger at the streaks on the floor. Shaper knelt down, studying the pattern carefully. The blood wasn't pooled, it was smeared, dragged, as if someone had been pulled across the floor against their will. "This came from here," Shaper said, gesturing toward the living room, and moved toward the garage. He stood and followed the trail, noting every detail. Droplets near the garage door. A faint handprint on the wall. And just outside in the driveway, tire marks that looked fresh. "Mr. Heisler," Shaper said, turning to Ken, "I need you to think carefully. Does your son have any enemies? Anyone who might want to hurt him?" Ken's mind immediately went to one person. One name that had been a source of stress and frustration for years. "Kelley," he said quietly. "His ex-girlfriend. Kelley Perry." Shaper pulled out his notepad. "Tell me about her." And so Ken did. He told the detective about the bitter custody battle that had consumed David's life for months. About how Kelley had lost custody of their daughter Mariah just 2 weeks ago. About her boyfriend, Francis McCard, a volatile man with a criminal record and a history of violence. About how Kelley had called Ken the night before, claiming David had texted her, though Ken didn't believe it. "She knows this house," Ken said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's been here before. She knows the layout, knows when we're home, knows everything." Detective Shaper exchanged a glance with his partner. They both knew what this meant. If Kelley Perry was involved, this wasn't a random act of violence. This was personal. Calculated. And if David had been taken, time was running out. "We need to find her," Shaper said. Now. Kelley Marie Perry wasn't hard to find. In fact, she called the police herself. At 10:32 a.m., just hours after Ken Heisler reported his son missing, Kelley's number flashed across Detective Shaper's phone. Her voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm for someone whose ex-boyfriend had just vanished under violent circumstances. "I heard David is missing," she said flatly. "I wanted to let you know that he texted me last night." Shaper's grip tightened on his phone. "What time did he text you, Ms. Perry?" "Around 3:40 in the morning. He sent me pictures of his dad's empty bedroom and the garage. Said his dad went to work and asked me to come over." "And did you?" A pause. "No. I went back to sleep." It was a lie. And Detective Shaper knew it. Within the hour, Kelley Perry was sitting across from detectives in an interrogation room at the Washington County Sheriff's Office.
What did you guys talk about?
He was trying to get me to go to his house and go stay the night with him. He was sending texts to my phone.
She wore a loose t-shirt and jeans, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face showed no signs of distress, no tears, no panic. Just a blank, unreadable expression that made the detective's skin crawl. "So walk me through yesterday," Detective Shaper began, leaning back in his chair. "When was the last time you actually spoke to David?" Kelley shifted slightly. "Sunday morning. He called asking me to come to his house to talk about things. About us. But I told him we don't have that kind of relationship anymore." "But he texted you again early Monday morning?" "Yes. At like 3:30. He sent pictures showing his dad was gone and asked me to come over. I just texted back good and went back to sleep." Shaper slid his phone across the table, displaying the text thread. "These are the messages?" Kelley glanced down and nodded. "And you didn't think it was strange that he was reaching out to you at 3 a.m., just 2 weeks after you lost custody of your daughter to him?" Her jaw tightened. "David's always been emotional. I figured he just wanted to talk." "Where were you Monday morning between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m.? "At Tammy Freeman's house. That's where I've been staying." "I was asleep." "Can anyone confirm that?" Another pause. "Tammy can. And my boyfriend, Frank." There it was. Francis McCard. The name that kept coming up, the shadow lurking behind every answer Kelley gave.
Before we had Mariah, he took off with a friend of his out of state. Not even his parents knew where he was.
And how long was he gone during that trip?
He was gone for about 2.5, 3 weeks.
In my mind, there was a possible chance that this could be the same thing.
Tell me about Frank, Shaper said, his tone sharpening. Kelley's expression softened slightly, almost defensively. He's been helping me through this custody thing. He's a good guy. He's just protective. Protective how? He doesn't like seeing me upset. He thinks David treated me unfairly in court. Shaper leaned forward. Did Frank ever threaten David? No, Kelley said quickly. Too quickly. Kelley, I'm going to be straight with you. There's blood all over David's house. His car is gone. His phone is off. And you're sitting here telling me you just went back to sleep after he invited you over at 3 a.m? Shaper's voice was calm but firm. I don't believe you. Kelley's face remained blank, but her hands fidgeted in her lap. I'm telling you the truth. Then why did Tammy Freeman drive you and Frank to David's house that morning? The question hit like a grenade. Kelley's eyes widened just for a second before she caught herself. But it was too late. The detective saw it. The crack in her armor. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. We have witnesses, Kelley. We have phone records. We have GPS data. So I'm going to ask you one more time, what happened at David Heisler's house Monday morning? Silence filled the room. Kelley stared down at the table, her breathing shallow. For a moment, it seemed like she might confess. But then she looked up, her face hardening once more. I want a lawyer. The interview ended there. But the investigation was just beginning. To understand why David Heisler opened his door that night, you have to understand the battle that had consumed his life for years. A battle over the one person he loved more than anything in the world, his 6-year-old daughter, Mariah. David and Kelley's relationship had always been turbulent. They met in their early 20s, fell fast, and had Mariah shortly after. But the cracks began showing almost immediately. Kelley struggled with substance abuse. David tried to help, tried to keep the family together, but eventually, he realized Mariah wasn't safe. The custody hearings began in 2014 and dragged on for 2 agonizing years. David presented evidence of Kelley's drug use, her association with dangerous people, her inability to provide a stable home. Kelley fought back, accusing David of being controlling, of trying to steal her daughter out of spite. But the courts saw through it. On June 13, 2016, Judge Thomas presided over the final hearing. The courtroom was tense, packed with family members from both sides. David sat with his parents, nervous but hopeful. Kelley sat with Frances McCard, her face a mask of barely contained rage. When the judge announced his decision, full custody to David Heisler, the room erupted. David's mother Debbie hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Across the aisle, Kelley stood frozen, her fists clenched. And Frances McCard? He leaned close to Kelley and whispered, loud enough for nearby witnesses to hear, "Don't worry. I'll fix this." Nobody reported it. Nobody thought it was serious. Bitter custody battles brought out the worst in people. Empty threats were common. But Frances McCard wasn't making an empty threat. He meant every word. For the next 2 weeks, David tried to move forward. He had Mariah full-time now, and he was determined to give her the life she deserved. He enrolled her in summer camp, planned trips to the park, talked about starting fresh. His parents were thrilled. Finally, after years of chaos, their son could be happy. But Kelley Perry was spiraling. Losing Mariah wasn't just a legal defeat, it was a complete loss of control. And Frances McCard, the man who claimed to love her, saw an opportunity. If David disappeared, custody would revert back to Kelley. It was simple. Brutal. And in McCard's twisted mind, it was the ultimate act of loyalty. The plan formed quickly. They just needed the right moment. the right opportunity. And on June 27th, when David sent those late-night texts, they got exactly what they were waiting for. At 3:40 a.m. on June 27, 2016, David Heisler made a decision that would cost him his life. He couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts of Mariah, of co-parenting, of trying to keep some semblance of peace with Kelley despite everything that had happened. He wanted things to be civil. He wanted his daughter to grow up without the constant tension between her parents. So he grabbed his phone and typed out a message to Kelley, "My dad just left for work. Come over." He snapped 2 photos, one of his father's empty bedroom, another of the vacant garage, and sent them as proof. Proof that he was alone. Proof that they could talk without interruption or judgment. Kelley's response came at 3:55 a.m. Just one word, "Good." David set his phone down and waited. Maybe she'd come. Maybe they'd finally have that conversation they needed. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out for Mariah's sake. But across town, in Tammy Freeman's garage apartment, something far more sinister was unfolding. Francis McCard sat on the edge of the bed, reading those text messages over Kelley's shoulder. His eyes narrowed as he studied the photos. David's father was gone. The house was empty. David was alone and vulnerable. "This is it," McCard said, his voice low and cold. "This is our chance." Kelley looked at him, confused. "Our chance for what?" "To fix everything. To get Mariah back." "Frank, what are you talking about?" McCard stood up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "He took your daughter. He humiliated you in court. He thinks he won." He stopped and looked directly at Kelley. "But if he's gone, Mariah comes back to you. It's that simple." Kelley's heart raced. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I mean we're going over there. Right now. And we're going to make sure David Heisler never takes anything from you again." Kelley would later claim she didn't understand what McCard meant. That she thought they were just going to scare David, maybe rough him up a little. But deep down, she knew. She knew exactly what Francis McCard was capable of. And she didn't stop him. They woke Tammy Freeman, their landlord and friend. "We need a ride," Kelley told her urgently. Tammy, groggy and confused, rubbed her eyes. "A ride? Now? It's almost 4 in the morning. Please, Tammy. It's important." Tammy didn't ask questions. She grabbed her keys, threw on a jacket, and within minutes, the 3 of them were in her car, driving through the dark, empty streets of Santa Clara toward the Heisler home. The ride was quiet. Too quiet. Kelley stared out the window, her mind spinning. McCard sat in the back seat, silent and focused, like a soldier preparing for battle. Tammy drove, unaware that she was about to become an accomplice to murder. At 4:18 a.m., Tammy's car pulled up 2 houses away from the Heisler residence. The street was pitch black, every house dark and silent. McCard and Kelley stepped out. "Wait here," McCard told Tammy. "We'll be quick." Tammy nodded, too tired to question it. She watched as the 2 figures disappeared into the shadows, walking toward David's front door. Kelley's hand was shaking as she raised it to knock. 3 soft taps. That's all it took. Inside, David heard the sound and smiled
Kelley
slightly.
The reason why
She
the text
came.
messages died off
She actually came.
was that she
Maybe
fell
there was
asleep.
hope after all. He walked to the door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. Standing there was Kelley, looking nervous and disheveled. But before David could speak, before he could even process what was happening, Francis McCard exploded forward from the shadows. The first punch landed square in David's face, sending him stumbling backward into the living room. The second punch came before David could even recover, catching him in the ribs and knocking the wind out of him. "What the hell?" David gasped, but McCard was already on him, shoving him against the wall with terrifying force. Kelley stood frozen in the doorway, watching as the man she claimed to love brutalized the father of her child. She would later describe this moment in her confession, her voice flat and emotionless. Frankie pushed me out of the way so he could get to David. They were fighting. David was trying to push him off, but Frankie kept hitting him. I just crouched in the corner by the door because I was scared. But Kelley wasn't just scared. She was complicit. Because when David broke free and tried to run, Kelley didn't open the door to let him escape. She stood there, blocking his only exit. McCard dragged David toward the kitchen, slamming him against the counter. David fought back, throwing wild punches, desperate to get free. But McCard was bigger, stronger, and fueled by a rage that had been building for weeks. The struggle moved from the living room to the kitchen, then toward the garage. Blood splattered across the floor as David's face split open from the repeated blows. He was bleeding, dazed, begging for this to stop. "Please," David choked out. "Please, just leave. Take whatever you want. Just go." But McCard wasn't there to rob him. He was there to erase him. "Get his keys," McCard barked at Kelley. She hesitated for just a moment before scrambling to find David's car keys on the counter. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed them and tossed them to McCard. "Open the garage," McCard ordered. Kelley hit the button, and the garage door slowly creaked open, revealing David's gray Saturn parked inside. McCard dragged David toward the car, his grip like iron around David's throat. "Get in the car," McCard growled. David shook his head, terror flooding his eyes. "No. No, please. Get in the car." David tried to resist, but another punch to the gut sent him crumpling to the ground. McCard yanked him up and shoved him toward the back seat. "I'm not going to kill you," McCard lied, his voice eerily calm now. "Just get in the car. We're just going to talk." But David knew better. He could see it in McCard's eyes. This wasn't about talking. This was about something far worse. Still, battered and bleeding, David had no choice. He climbed into the back seat, and McCard slammed the door shut behind him. "Pull the car out," McCard told Kelley. Kelley, trembling, slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. She backed the car out of the garage and into the driveway, where Tammy Freeman's car was still idling 2 houses down. McCard climbed into the back seat next to David, his hand gripping David's neck to keep him subdued. "Drive," he told Kelley. And she did. Without question. Without hesitation. She drove her daughter's father toward his death. Pause for just a second. "This case is about to take an even darker turn, and I need to know, do you think Kelley Perry knew what was going to happen? Or was she manipulated by Francis McCard? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. And if this story is gripping you the way it's gripping me, hit that like button and share this video. More people need to know the truth about what happened to David Heisler. Let's continue. The gray Saturn moved through the darkness like a ghost, its headlights cutting through the empty roads leading out of Santa Clara. Inside, David Heisler sat in the back seat, bloodied and terrified, with Francis McCard's hand pressed firmly against his neck. Kelley drove in silence, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. Behind them, Tammy Freeman followed in her own car, still unaware of the full horror unfolding just ahead of her. David's mind raced. He needed to escape. He needed to call for help. But his phone was gone, left behind at the house, and his wallet, his ID, everything was still sitting on his dresser. He was completely at McCard's mercy. "Where are we going?" David managed to rasp out, his throat raw from McCard's grip. "Shut up," McCard hissed. "Just shut up and don't make this harder than it needs to be." They drove for what felt like hours but was really only about 30 minutes. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by the vast, empty darkness of the Arizona Strip, a remote stretch of desert where civilization ended and isolation began. This was McCard's plan all along. Take David somewhere remote. Somewhere no one would hear him scream. Somewhere his body wouldn't be found for weeks, maybe months. Finally, Kelley pulled the car off the main road onto a narrow dirt path that wound deeper into the wilderness. The headlights illuminated nothing but sagebrush and red rock formations. They were miles from anywhere. "Stop here," McCard commanded. Kelley brought the car to a halt and killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. Tammy's car pulled up behind them, and she stepped out, finally starting to realize something was very, very wrong. "What's going on?" Tammy called out nervously. "Stay in the car," McCard snapped. But Tammy didn't listen. She walked closer, her heart pounding, and that's when she saw David in the back seat, his face swollen and bloody, his eyes wide with terror. "Oh my God," Tammy whispered. "Frank, what did you do?" "I said stay in the car." McCard yanked David out of the back seat and threw him to the ground. David hit the dirt hard, gasping for air. He tried to crawl away, but McCard kicked him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. "Please," David begged, coughing up blood. "Please, I have a daughter. I have a little girl. Don't do this." For a brief moment, Kelley looked at David, really looked at him, and something flickered across her face. Regret? Guilt? Horror at what she'd helped set in motion. But she said nothing. She just stood there, frozen, as Francis McCard pulled a gun from his waistband. The sight of the weapon sent a jolt of pure terror through David's body. "No. No, please. Kelley, please stop him." Kelley turned away, unable to watch. McCard aimed the gun at David's head. "You took everything from her. Now you're going to pay for it." And then he pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the empty desert, a single, final sound that marked the end of David Heisler's life. He collapsed onto the red dirt, his body motionless, his blood seeping into the earth. Tammy Freeman screamed, her hands flying to her mouth in horror. "What did you do? Oh my God, what did you do?" McCard turned to her, his face cold and emotionless. "Get back in your car. Now." Tammy, shaking uncontrollably, stumbled backward. She wanted to run, wanted to call the police, but she was terrified McCard would turn the gun on her next. So she did as she was told. She got back in her car. Kelley stood frozen, staring at David's lifeless body. The father of her child. The man she once loved. Dead because of a plan she'd helped execute. "Let's go," McCard said, wiping the blood off his hands on his jeans. "We need to get rid of the car." They left David's body there, alone in the desert, and drove away as if nothing had happened. The gray Saturn needed to disappear. And fast. As the sun began to rise over the desert on June 27, Francis McCard, Kelley Perry, and Tammy Freeman drove back toward civilization with a dead man's blood still fresh on their hands. But instead of panic, McCard displayed an eerie calmness, as if he'd done this before. "We dumped the car near the state line," McCard said from the passenger seat. "Make it look like he drove himself there." Kelley, still in shock, nodded numbly. She hadn't spoken since the gunshot. Her mind kept replaying the moment David collapsed, the sound of his final breath, the way his eyes went vacant. But she pushed it down, buried it deep, because facing it meant accepting what she'd become, a murderer. They drove to Beaver Dam, Arizona, a small, desolate area right on the Utah-Arizona border. It was the perfect spot, remote enough that the car wouldn't be noticed immediately, but close enough to the highway that when it was eventually found, police might think David had run away or met with foul play far from home. McCard parked the Saturn behind an abandoned building and wiped down the steering wheel, the door handles, anything they might have touched. The interior was stained with David's blood, a dark reminder of the violence that had unfolded just hours earlier. "Leave it," McCard said. "Let's go." The three of them piled into Tammy's car and drove back to Santa Clara in silence. Tammy gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles ached, tears streaming down her face. She'd just witnessed a murder. She'd helped transport a killer. And now she was complicit. When they arrived back at Tammy's house, McCard turned to both women with a look that chilled them to their cores. "Nobody says a word about this. Not to anyone. If the cops come asking, we were all home last night. Asleep. Got it?" Kelley nodded quickly. Tammy hesitated. Frank, this is murder. We can't just. I said, got it? McCard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Tammy swallowed hard and nodded. Got it. But McCard wasn't done covering his tracks. He knew the police would come knocking eventually. David's father would report him missing. There would be questions. Investigations. And if anyone looked too closely at Kelley or him, everything would unravel. So he devised a backup plan. He told Kelley exactly what to say if the police contacted her. Stick to the story. David texted you. You ignored him. You went back to sleep. Simple. Clean. No gaps. And for the next several hours, that's exactly what Kelley did. When Detective Shaper called her that morning, she played her role perfectly. Calm. Concerned. Cooperative. She even offered to come down to the station to give a statement, knowing it would make her look innocent. But the detectives weren't fooled. They'd seen too many guilty people play the victim. And Kelley Perry's performance was just a little too perfect. Meanwhile, back at the Heisler home, forensic teams were combing through every inch of the house. They collected blood samples, fingerprints, fibers, anything that might lead them to David. The evidence painted a clear picture. David had been attacked inside his home and forcibly removed. This wasn't a runaway. This was an abduction. And the primary suspects? Kelley Perry and Francis McCard. On July 1st, 4 days after David's disappearance, a construction worker in Beaver Dam, Arizona made a grim discovery. A gray Saturn, parked behind an old building, its interior stained with dried blood. The license plate matched David Heisler's missing vehicle. Police descended on the scene immediately. Inside the car, they found a bullet casing and more blood evidence. But no body. No David. The discovery of the car confirmed what detectives had feared: David Heisler was likely dead. Now it was just a matter of finding his body and building a case strong enough to put his killers behind bars. Pressure mounted on Kelley Perry with each passing day. Detectives brought her in for multiple interviews, each one more intense than the last. They had her phone records. They had GPS data showing she'd been near David's house that morning. They had witnesses who'd heard Francis McCard threaten David. But Kelley held firm. I don't know what happened to David, she repeated over and over, her voice flat and emotionless. Then, on July 3rd, detectives played their trump card. They brought in Tammy Freeman. Tammy had been crumbling under the weight of guilt since that horrific night. She couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's body collapsing in the desert. She knew she had to tell the truth, even if it meant going to prison. And so, sitting across from Detective Shaper, Tammy Freeman broke. I drove them there, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what was going to happen. I swear I didn't know. Shaper leaned forward. Drove them where, Tammy? To David's house. Early that morning. Around 4 a.m. Kelley and Frank asked for a ride. I thought they were just going to talk to him. But they didn't just talk, did they? Tammy shook her head, sobbing now. Frank attacked him. Beat him. Dragged him into the car. And then we drove out to the desert, and Frank, he shot him. He killed him. The confession was everything the detectives needed. Within hours, they arrested Francis McCard at Tammy's house. He didn't resist. In fact, he seemed almost relieved, like the weight of what he'd done was finally too much to carry alone. But Kelley? She still denied everything. So detectives brought her in one final time. This time, they didn't hold back. They laid out every piece of evidence: the phone records, the GPS data, Tammy's confession, the blood in David's car. They told her she was going to prison for the rest of her life unless she cooperated. And finally, after hours of interrogation, Kelley Perry broke. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Okay, I'll tell you what happened. What followed was a chilling, step-by-step account of David's final hours. How she'd lured him with those late-night texts. How McCard had burst through the door and attacked him. How they'd forced David into his own car and driven him out to the desert. "Did you know Frank was going to kill him?" Detective Shaper asked. Kelley hesitated. Then, quietly, "I knew something bad was going to happen. But I didn't think he'd actually." "You didn't think he'd pull the trigger?" Kelley nodded, tears finally streaming down her face. "I just wanted Mariah back. That's all I wanted." But wanting her daughter back had cost David Heisler his life. And now Kelley Perry would pay the price. For 7 agonizing weeks, David Heisler's body lay undiscovered in the vast Arizona desert. His family held out hope, praying for a miracle, even as detectives prepared them for the worst. Then, on August 15, 2016, a Bureau of Land Management geologist was conducting a routine survey in the Mount Trumbull area when he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. A body, badly decomposed, lying face down in the red dirt. Police were called immediately. Dental records confirmed what everyone already feared: it was David Heisler. He'd been shot once in the head, execution style. His body had been left exposed to the elements, scavenged by wildlife, nearly unrecognizable. But the evidence was clear. David had been murdered in cold blood and abandoned like trash in the middle of nowhere. The discovery brought a devastating closure to the Heisler family. Debbie, David's mother, collapsed when she received the news. Ken stood stoic, his fists clenched, fury and grief warring inside him. And little Mariah, only 6 years old, would grow up without her father, the man who'd fought so hard to protect her. The autopsy confirmed what detectives already knew from Kelley's confession. David had died from a single gunshot wound to the head. The time of death was consistent with the early morning hours of June 27. Everything lined up. Now it was time for justice. Francis McCard, Kelley Perry, and Tammy Freeman were all charged in connection with David Heisler's murder. But their fates would be very different. Tammy Freeman, who'd cooperated fully with investigators, accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to obstruction of justice and agreed to testify against McCard and Perry. In exchange, she received a reduced sentence, just a few years in prison instead of life. Kelley Perry, facing the possibility of the death penalty, also accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to second-degree murder and kidnapping. In exchange for her full cooperation and testimony against Francis McCard, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. She was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. But Francis McCard? He wasn't getting off so easy. McCard's trial began in early 2018, nearly 2 years after David's murder. The prosecution painted a damning picture of a violent, jealous man who'd decided to fix Kelley's custody problem by eliminating David entirely. Witness after witness took the stand. Tammy Freeman described the horrific night in the desert. Kelley Perry recounted how McCard had attacked David and dragged him from his home. Forensic experts presented blood evidence, ballistics reports, and GPS data that placed McCard at every crime scene. The defense tried to argue that Kelley was the mastermind, that McCard had been manipulated and coerced. But the evidence didn't support it. Text messages, witness testimony, and McCard's own violent history told a different story. After just 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, kidnapping, aggravated assault. Francis McCard was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the sentence, David's family sat in the front row, holding each other tightly. It wouldn't bring David back. Nothing ever would. But at least his killer would never walk free again. David Heisler should be alive today. He should be watching his daughter grow up, teaching her to ride a bike, helping her with homework, being the father he fought so hard to become. Instead, he's buried in a cemetery in Santa Clara, Utah, his life cut tragically short by 2 people he trusted, one he once loved, and one who claimed to love her. Kelley Perry remains
Kelley
in
said
prison,
the
serving her
reason why the text
25-year
messages
sentence.
died off
She'll be
is
eligible
that
for
she
parole in
fell asleep.
2041 when she's in her 50s. Whether she'll ever truly accept responsibility for her role in David's death remains to be seen. Frances McCard will die in prison. There's no parole. No second chances. Just 4 concrete walls and the weight of what he did. And Tammy Freeman, released after serving just 4 years, has tried to rebuild her life. But the guilt of that night will haunt her forever. As for Mariah, David's daughter, she was raised by her grandparents Ken and Debbie Heisler. They've worked tirelessly to keep David's memory alive, to make sure Mariah knows that her father loved her more than anything in the world. That he fought for her. That he died because he refused to give up on being her dad. This case is a stark reminder of how custody battles can escalate into violence when the wrong people get involved. It's a story of manipulation, obsession, and a love so twisted it turned deadly. David Heisler's final mistake wasn't opening that door. It was believing that the mother of his child still had enough humanity left to protect him. But Kelley Perry had made her choice. And it cost David everything. This case shook me to my core, and I know it's affected you too. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on Kelley Perry. Do you think she deserves a second chance, or should she have received life without parole like Frances McCard? And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel because we're bringing you more deep dive true crime cases that demand justice and awareness. Share this video so more people know David Heisler's name and the tragedy that took him from his daughter. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next case.